Good day, everybody. My name is Deacon Derek Walcott, and welcome to our weekly program, Conversations with Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. Now, today's topic, we're going to be dealing with T&T. The education system needs partnership, not conflict. So let us welcome the Archbishop. Good day, sir. How are you?
I am doing really well, Deacon Derek, and I ask blessings upon you and upon all of us looking at this in Trinidad and Tobago, on radio, on TV, on all kinds of media, social media, and all of the region, that God's blessings will be with us in all the tremendous ways that God would like.
Wonderful. Well, let's begin this conversation. What is happening with our Catholic education?
You know, we're facing a major challenge, not just with Catholic education, but with denominational education. I would say it's in peril, and it's been challenged on many, many sides over the last couple of years. The general public have taken to believing that if we could do away with the Concordat, which means do away with denominational education, we would solve all the problems in the country. And that has been a major topic for people on talk shows. I've heard it on the talk shows. I've heard it all over the place. And it's become a kind of a national cry that the real problem that we have is denominational education and that Concordat. It was interesting to me that weeks after winning the general election in 2020, the government decided to jump in on a town hall meeting with denominational boards, or on the denominational boards, and on the Concordat. And it was led by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education. They conducted a series of town hall meetings on the Concordat that, let's just say, weren't the most even-handed communication that I've heard. And let's also say it really riled up the country on the Concordat is as a problem, and not understanding the Concordat as a gift that has been given to the country, or what the Concordat represents as a major gift given back to this country. Now, there's a lot of miseducation around this. There's a lot of misinformation around the Concordat. And I would say that fire has been fueled by social media, by radio, by talk shows, by a whole host of people. Newspaper articles have been written on this. And it's an interesting thing, because the government then announced its decision to set up a committee to review the Concordat and ask the denominational boards, to supply a few people to that committee. And that was intriguing, because I just looked on at it and at the time and said, well, this is very, very strange for me. What's strange for me is that the signatories to the Concordat in 1960 are Father Pedro Valdez of the Roman Catholic Church and the Honorable John Donaldson, who was the Minister of Education at the time. So for those who don't know what the Concordat is an agreement between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Roman Catholic Church about how we will regulate the relationship around our schools, around education, and who will be responsible for what in the course of this relationship. So the government had promised certain things. The schools or the denominational boards or the Catholic Church promised some different things. And like every agreement, it's a living document that has, regulated over a period of time the life of education in the country. What's intriguing is that, if the government had a challenge with the Concordat, I would think that if one party of a contractual relationship believes there's something fundamentally wrong or needs to be reviewed with the agreement, the first conversation you have would be to begin with the parties involved.
Right.
So if the government had a problem with Shell or with BP or with any international organization or local organization with a contract that they're in, you don't do a town hall meeting. What you do is you sit down with the parties,
right,
and you start talking among yourselves with these parties so that you find a way forward into a way to resolve whatever the challenges are. But to date, the denominational boards have not been invited into a meeting with the government to discuss the Concordat.
Well, hold on.
Whether it's merits, it's demerits, whether it's helpful or unhelpful, there's been no conversation.
But well, here's where I want to jump in. So you said that they started these town hall meetings. So,
Yeah.
and really and truly, again, let's elaborate on that. The Concordat is an agreement between the government, yes, and the denominational boards. Am I getting that correct?
The government and the Catholic Church, actually.
The government, yeah, because it was Pedro Valdez, Father Pedro Valdez.
It was the Catholic Church that led it because we had the most schools at that time, so we were the one who led the conversation.
No.
But it is what covers all denominational boards. It doesn't cover only us. It covers everybody.
Now, this sounds like politics to me. I'm just saying so. It sounds like politics to me rather than, as you're saying, if we have an agreement and you use Shell and BP, then we will talk rather than go out into the public sphere. I feel like, I don't know why it just sounds political.
Well, and I understand from one perspective, because the Concordat has become the whipping boy for every ill that there is in country. There are some commentators that say that the reason why we have such poverty, why more Black people have not been educated, why this, why that, and why the other, is because of the Concordat. And so there is a public opinion that the Concordat is a perverse declaration, document, contract, and it should be thrown out immediately. That is a public opinion. But the public is the public. The signatories of the relationship is different. And that's what I'm saying. That the surprise to me is not that there is a public conversation, but that the signatories have not been brought together so that the signatories could sit together and could talk together about how to vision education for the children of this nation for the 21st century.
Your words are actually to discuss the Concordat, its merits or demerits in furtherance of national development. That is what you're saying in essence.
Yeah, because if the Concordat has any validity at all, it is about the development of the nation by the development of the children of the nation. That's why it was done, and that's why all the denominations have gotten into education, because of a commitment that we have made to the children, to the nation, and to our development.
In reading your article, I saw that you did have a first meeting with the new Minister of Education before the town hall meetings began. You want to share with this, because you said in it she raised the issue of the Concordat as a side issue.
It was intriguing. It was a courtesy visit. And we were talking about several things to do with education, but immediately the matter of the Concordat came up. And it's really, and I imagine as a new minister, it landed on her because out of the elections, I would imagine some of the constituents felt that very strongly about the Concordat. And okay, fine, I get all of that. But what was intriguing was that when it was raised, I said, well, there are easy ways to solve this. But what is the real problem? I think the major challenge people have with the Concordat is that the agreement that 20% of the candidates that come into the denominational school, the denomination is allowed to select them from a list of students who have passed, not students who have failed. And why that is important is that you have to also guarantee the Catholic nature or the Hindu nature or the Muslim nature of your school. And so if we have schools that without the 20%, there would be very few Catholics in the school. A lot of the Catholics come in on the 20% because those areas are not predominantly Catholic.
Okay.
And so that 20% was given as a way of ensuring that you keep a Catholic or Hindu or Muslim element core within your school, and that core really takes you and where you need to go and does, carries you forward. So that's a challenge. The solution, from my perspective, and I'm not saying it's an easy one, but it's the best solution. The government really would need to find political will and to select 15 schools across Trinidad and Tobago, north, south, east, west Tobago, and develop those schools. You could call them colleges and convents. You need to spend the kind of money that is required on the infrastructure and also on the teaching staff and upgrades of the staff, etc. Find the right principal, the right staff, and work hard over a couple of years so that those schools become prestige schools as good as or better than the denominational schools that everybody's trying to get into. The real challenge is really the SCA exam, because in the SCA exam, everybody in the North wants their child to go to a few schools. Mm-hmm. And it is a bottleneck problem that we have, that you have 18,000 children trying to get maybe about 5,000 places. Or 4,000 places, or 6,000 places. And after that, the students are not happy with the other places that are available. Well, what if we created another 6,000 places of a very high level, mm-hmm. equal to the places everybody is competing with right now? That, I think, would be it would be a 10-year project or 15-year project. But within the 10 to 15 years, you would have something of another way of looking at it. If I look at Trinity and Bishop's College in the East, right, that started 20 years ago, mm-hmm. A lot of people in the East now want to go to those schools.
Correct.
So let's do the same model. Create schools around the country. Let's ease up the bottleneck, and then the SCA challenge and the anxiety of SCA will come straight down, and also the whole ethos around transition from primary to secondary school would also be a lot better for a lot more students. And then while we're doing that, I would say let's throw in 2 or 3 magnet schools in science, technology, and engineering STEM or visual and arts performance, so in technical and vocational education and training. Let's train a couple schools in each educational district that focus on those kinds of students. That means that now you spread your students around. Those who want a traditional grammar school education, well, we have more places for them. And then if we have specialty in science and in visual arts and in technical and vocational, we have more places for them. Now we don't have the rush on the few schools that everybody wants to get into. And now we have a better offering for the children of the country. That takes a big vision. It takes some money, but we have the infrastructure. It's about repurposing existing schools or bringing the partners to the table and say, how can we work together to achieve this vision?
So I'm going to ask you a question. These thoughts that you have and you're sharing with us today, were they ever put forward by any other person sharing this kind of formula or this kind of remedy to our education system? And by the way, you forget sports. I just want to let you know your partner sitting on here is a sports one. No. I ain't a sports in this thing, you know.
Yeah. You're right. Because I mean, I have said, like St. Francis College and St. Anthony's College, I would love them to be academies for arts and sports.
Yeah.
Because the core group that go to those two schools are really great in arts and in sports. And that would really, again, be a catchment that would be very particular to some of our children that are coming through the system. So these thoughts, I had shared this with the minister, and then in researching education over the last while, I've seen ideas like this being floated at different times, over the last while as a solution. This is not rocket science. If you have 18,000 children trying to get into 4,000 places, you have to do something to make more places for those children.
And you talked about, I want you to talk a little bit more about the magnet schools, as you call them. Do you see them as enhancing the overall quality of education in the country?
You see, if you go to England, you will see a lot of this has happened already. Yeah? Mm-hmm. We have, when we became a nation, the schools that we had, which were styled on the British grammar school, like a QRC, a St. Mary's College, a Fatima College, St. Joseph Convent, Holy Name Convent. These were schools on the British grammar school that traditionally would have trained or formed young people for education and for higher education. Now, everybody in the country is not gifted equally in terms of what they should be doing after school. So if you have a child who is really gifted with their hands, really gifted in concept and design and innovation, who is entrepreneurial or who is a sports-minded person, who is a visually driven person, who is technology-driven, our traditional education does not help them develop their core skills. And so what happens is they end up feeling as if they didn't quite pass or didn't quite do well if they go to the traditional grammar school, because the grammar school doesn't really focus on their skill set. The government had started vocational schools at one stage. Mm-hmm. We haven't really developed it to the next level. One of the hardest things to find are tradespeople who understand how to run business, who understand how to bill, who understand how to write a proper invoice, who understand how to do a proper pricing, and who are reliable in what they're offering you. So there is a real need for education in these areas. Now, science, technology, engineering, and maths, that's a high level skill set that really would take a child to another level if that's where their gifts are. So the point of the magnet school is that if we recognize the kind of proportions of gifts that our children have, and also what we need as a nation over the next 20, 30 years, what our needs would be.
Right.
Education really should be driving innovation and driving development of a nation. That's really what education should be doing. It should be moving the nation forward in development. And if the education that we're doing now is the same basic things that we were doing for the last 40 to 50 years, then we have basically been believing that the output of our schools over the last 40 years is going to be the same needs we're going to have in the next 50 years. And the transformation that we're seeing in society, the needs in the next 50 years for Trinidad and Tobago are going to be different from what we've had in the last 50. And I think this is the time to really do the work and vision a way forward for the kind of society we want and the kind of skills we want to develop over the next while.
I couldn't agree with you more. Last evening, as I finished work pretty late, I picked up a guy at the side of the road, and he said, we were having a conversation. And he shared with me, because he knew I'm in education, he says, I don't know what's happening, but in my field, and he does he's a marine electrician. He said, there are nobody, he can find no other young people in that field. And therefore, for him, in his own organization, there were just two people, himself and an elderly gentleman being a marine electrician. And he said, this is something where I think young people, there's a fantastic career in this area. So this sort of supports what you're sharing.
And there are other niche fields that if we developed, and it's more than develop, it's what a society puts as success. What we put as success is you come out with 8 or 10 O-level passes, three or four A-level passes, and you are now ready for university. And I'm saying that is one model of success for one type of child. There are other models of success for other types of children. That's where we have to go. So that a child who is not catered for in that first model should come out of school feeling also that they have been successful and they're ready to contribute to this society. That means that we have to have various types of educational offerings given our society and given where we want our society to be over the next 20 to 30 years.
Okay, I want to bring you back to your conversation. Trinidad and Tobago's education needs partnership, not conflict. And you said in your conversation, in the Catholic News, everybody, that you do not achieve national development by dismantling centers of excellence. Rather, you use existing excellence to raise the bar across the board. So let's discuss that.
A great example of that would be, again, I go to recent schools, Trinity and Bishops East. The entrepreneurs or the developers of the Tri-City area approached the Anglican Church and asked, would you open 2 schools in the East? Now, just from a planning and a development perspective, that was a brilliant stroke of genius. Why? Because you know how many children come from the East and up past Sandy Grande and further into Port of Spain every day for education? It's crazy. And the hours that they burn in doing that, and then the resilience that they have, the fact that they're traveling so long every day, they don't have the means of doing the extra curriculum. So a lot of their childhood during secondary school is spent in a maxi taxi, getting to school and getting back from school. And so childhood is being lost.
Yeah.
Now, the move to open those two schools in the East, that was a real stroke of genius. Why? Because it gave the East options now rather than coming into Port of Spain. 20 years later, those schools are desirous of people living in the East.
Yeah.
And just like the Port of Spain schools, those schools are being seen as good schools that I want my children to go to. Well, imagine if we did another 15 of those north, south, east, and west. One or two in Diego Martin, as far somewhere in south, way beyond San Fernando, Superior, Pinal, or one of those areas. You go, in the east, you go up further, Arima, as a catchment for Grandy and so on. But you, through planners and knowing where your populations are, if that was done, the bottleneck into the so-called prestige school will come down very quickly. And then we would get forward. But the other thing that we have to do, and this is where this comes back now to the denominational schools, us included. One of the things we know is that the schools in our poorest areas are the schools that do the worst. And that's not because we have not been trying it. But when a child, when a mother is in poverty, not eating properly, and not having proper nutrition while she's pregnant, that child's development of language takes a lot longer than another child who has been properly receiving proper nutrition in the womb. What that means is that when that child reaches 5 years old, they're not ready for language and numeracy as yet. And so they enter into school at that age, but they're not yet ready. And there are things that we would have to do to prepare that child to be ready at 5 years old, or ready at 6 years old. And if we're not doing that, and the child comes in and is unready, and the rest of their peers are ready, that child starts education by believing they are dumb, they are silly, they are not bright. And then once you have that mindset, it's so hard to change it going forward. And so there's some things that we have to do in the poorer communities that would move education forward. Again, that requires a deep partnership and trust among all of us if we're going to move forward. But here's what I want to say. The people who are crying unfair because the boards receive 20% choice on who comes into their school, they're not seeing the real point. The point is that if these denominations did not have secondary schools, the 80% that are now going to those schools would have nowhere to go. And that's the point that people don't want to see. It's not about the 20%, It is that we give the government 80% of the spaces in our school to put the nation's children into them. All we ask is to retain 20% that we choose, but the 100% of the parents are paying taxes for the education of their children.
Now, you said if they dismantle the Concordat, then you're looking at 80% would have nowhere to go.
Correct.
Wow.
I'm also saying that if the denominations did not invest in education long ago, the 80% would have nowhere to go.
All right.
If back in 1961, rather than having a Concordat, what we had was a major breakdown, and the denominations decided, look, we're not able, we're closing our schools. The 80% that are going to these schools now would have nowhere to go. So we have to, it depends on how you want to look at it. You could look at it as, well, they have 20, you all are getting 20% of the choice. Why? We could say, no, the government are actually getting 80% of the choice. And you have, by saying that, you have to understand that the school and its property belongs to the particular denomination who has spent a lot of money every single year to keep the standard of their school high. Beyond what the government invests, each of our schools raise significant amount of funds and support through the denomination to ensure that we continue offering the kind of education that we are offered. And this is both human, financial, and kind cash, all kinds of support to make sure that we keep the positive outcomes that we've been having.
I think that that's very important for the public to hear, and they're hearing it now, that the plant, the property, and so on is owned by the denominational boards, and that they spend significant sums to maintain its upkeep and to keep its standard at a particular level. That's important, and it's more, it goes above and beyond what the government spends on public assisted schools. And that's critical to hear. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the 20% selection is a very small ask when you consider the millions and millions of dollars that the boards have to raise every year to keep the schools going. And this is above and beyond what the government spends through the taxpayers of the country.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the Teaching Service Commission. Give us some insight into this. You said more recently the Teaching Service Commission, the TSC, unilaterally decided to dismantle a settled practice of filling primary school vacancies that had been in effect for over 60 years. Explain that. What exactly happened there?
The commission came up against some irregularities or whatever they came up against, and made the decision to change a settled practice. But it was made without, again, and this is the challenge, it was made without proper consultation. So because there was no consultation, the boards were simply told or instructed, this is the new practice. Okay. And this decision, I would say, has caused a delay in filling vacancies in the schools, which is a major challenge come September. We have to find a solution because we have to fill vacancies. I know in our schools, we have quite a few vacancies, and that comes from people who are retired or people who fall ill, or in some cases, people who have died on the job. So you have these vacancies, but you can't bring new children into the school if you don't have the teachers to teach them. So we have this standoff. But why is it standoff and why is this important? So remember, we started with the public cry against the Concordat. Right. The government's response to that public cry. Then much more social media and so around this Concordat. Now we have the Teaching Service Commission disrupting a settled practice. It's not one element or the other, but the denominational boards are starting to feel, well, wait, we do all of this every single year. Really and truly, this can't continue the way it's going right now. This is not working. So all that has created in the last while is a round of antagonism now between the denominational boards and the state. And it's just growing to crescendo. That's why I chose to write, so that at least everybody could understand, well, here's a perspective from a denominational board of what is happening. It's not this, that, or the other. It's the whole picture that we need to review. And then we need to find a better way forward. This matter has gone legal. The Presbyterians and the Hindus have had a pre-action protocol letter. And I mean, we have gone for legal advice. The Hindus and Presbyterians also have published their legal advice. And the opinion is that the Teaching Service Commission has acted wrongly in what they have done. In fact, the Teaching Service Commission has expressly admitted that his action was unlawful in what it did. But the challenge is that despite all of this, their process continues in going ahead with a process that we're all saying should be stopped so that we find the right solution. But the
Wait.
process continues along in the interviewing of the teachers.
So the teaching service, based on the outcome, the legal outcome, they've admitted
So we
that
have
it
based
has
on legal opinion.
the legal opinion. But you're saying that they have agreed, right? That the opinion is that the TSC has acted wrongly. In fact, the TSC has expressly admitted its action is unlawful.
Yes.
And they continue.
But correct. So if your action is unlawful,
Yeah.
for me, the next thing you do is you say, all right, folks, we made a mistake.
Right.
Sorry about this. We have serious challenges on every side, but could we find a way forward that would serve everybody better? That's how I would want to go.
Right.
But the way it has gone is that, well, okay, we know we made a mistake here, but we have to complete this process. So we're going to continue the screening of teachers. And we say, but to what end? Now, all of this is saying, what the point I'm making is not about the Teaching Service Commission. It's not about the government of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not about the citizens. It's not about the social media. It's not about the radio shows, the talk shows, the hosts. It's not about the ads or the columns in the newspaper calling for an end to the Concordat. It's all of it. And until you see that there is a much bigger picture, you say, well, you know, this is a small thing. This is a small thing. This is a small thing. I mean, a lot of these things that have happened, I just did not even worry to make a response on. I just left it and said, well, let's see where it goes, and then I will decide what to do later. Now I feel, no, let's look at it as a big picture. When we understand the big picture, now we have to say, okay, how do we go forward? Here's an interesting thing. According to the Education Policy Paper 2017-2022, the denominational boards educate 71.3% of the primary school children in Trinidad and Tobago. Have you heard that number?
That's big. That's big. 71.3% the denominational boards educate of our primary school population. That's
this
big.
Is regardless of race, class, color, denomination, regardless of everything. 73% of the children entering into primary schools, 71% of the children entering into primary schools come into the denominational board school.
That's huge.
32% of the children in secondary schools come into a denominational board school. That's a significant.
Yeah.
That's a significant percentage. Now, here's the thing. The parents of all of these children are paying tax to educate their children. It's not that the children in the denominational schools, their parents not paying tax. Everybody is paying the same taxes towards all the goods and services of the budget of Trinidad and Tobago. So the government is a steward, not an owner. And so whether the child is educated through the denominational school or through the government school, the government's responsibility remains the same, just as our responsibility remains the same. The Catholic philosophy of education here is completely aligned with Section 4F of the Republican Constitution, the 1976 Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, which recognizes and declares the right of a parent or guardian to provide a school of his or her own choice for the education of their child. So the Constitution or the Republican Constitution says that the parent or guardian has a right to provide a school of their choice for the education of their child. Now, the Catholic philosophy goes on to say that the denominations have a responsibility to offer education that aligns with the values and faith of the parents and guardians, and to assist them in carrying out their responsibility of educating their children according to their faith and their values. The state, on the other hand, has a responsibility to ensure every child in the nation is educated at a high standard in alignment with a plan for sustainable national and human development. The healthy relationship between the parent, the denominational board, and the government of Trinidad and Tobago is what will produce the best results for the education in Trinidad and Tobago of the children.
I can see I can then see why your topic of conversation today is we need partnership, not conflict. Partnership, not conflict.
Because the fundamental responsibility for educating a child belongs to a parent.
Yeah.
The parent. And the parent has the right to choose. Yeah. And therefore, the secondary right is to the denominational board that says we will assist the parents by providing schools that have the values and faith formation that you parents are asking for. Mm-hmm. But the government has the responsibility to ensure every child in the nation is educated at a certain standard in alignment with the vision of the nation over the next couple, 20, 30 years.
And that is why you and I pay taxes.
And that's where the tax money goes towards, and the education budget is, I think it's $6 billion or something like that a year.
Yeah.
It's not a small budget.
Yeah.
But it's an important part of the budget because it's a real investment into the future. But here's what I want you to consider. 200 years ago, and I'm talking now 1823. You got me here?
I got here 1823, exactly 200 years ago.
In 1823, the Anglicans and the Catholics had already established schools in Trinidad and Tobago.
Wow.
The Anglicans established because the government was an English government and built a school that the Anglicans were asked to run. And the Catholic Church had already established schools in Trinidad and Tobago 200 years ago. This is important because people look at what we have now, but long before there was a government of Trinidad and Tobago, the religions in this nation were educating the children of this country. The nation would not be where it is today if they did not make if the religions did not make a significant commitment to education and thus to national development. And that's the piece that people are missing. When you talk about the 20%, you're not also talking about in 1860-something that St. Mary's College or in 1850-something St. Joseph Convent were established not by the government or by the colonial office or by England or by the British, but by the Catholic Church for the sake of the education of the children of the nation. And that is a historical piece that most people just want to forget. We've been in this thing for a long time. The nation could not be where it is today if the faiths did not make the level of investment in education that we have made.
And you're talking about primary schools also all around the country.
While the government has attacked denomination education from very different sides, I want to say that there's now an existential issue that I think is much bigger, that we really have to come together in partnership to face. And the question of the concordat might actually become more important for the government now than it was before. You see, we have to ask ourselves, what's the model of education that is necessary for Trinidad and Tobago, that the nation that we want to become in the next 25, 30 years? What model of education? And that's why I was talking about the variety of schools that are required in our time. Leadership for me is getting the right people to the right conversation. And if the government had treated or chooses to treat the denominational boards as partners, then we could really begin, to me, what is far more important than all these other skirmishes I've spoken about. For me, those are low-level stuff and of little importance when I consider the bigger picture. How do we move education to suit the 21st century child in Trinidad and Tobago? And I believe the only way we're going to do that is if the government and the denominational schools and the parents become partners in the education of the children of this nation. This is a vital conversation that we need to move this nation forward. And without this conversation about the model of education we want over the next 30 years, we will continue the skirmish. And who will suffer is the children. I think we could all agree that our existing education is failing our children, and by extension, failing the nation. We have schools that we know we've tried everything we can, but they're not working. When you look at crime, at violence, at high dropout rates, at the disappointing performance rates of our students at SEA, at CAPE, at CSEC, and the lack of capacity for reasoned conversation, even of graduates from our university, you know that we have a problem with education. We have a lot of certification going on, but are we really getting education happening, and the kind of education that we are going to need over the next 30 years to steady the troubling waters that our nation is going to have to navigate with everything coming our way? When you look at our low productivity rate as a nation, and the fact that very little seems to be working efficiently in our public sector, this is borne out by a public perception and the low scores in the ease of doing business surveys. You know that something is wrong in our education, and something is wrong in the way that we have been preparing citizens for the workplace, for public service, and for private enterprise within the country.
So our education system is affecting us from top to bottom.
Today. And unless we are willing to reimagine the education system and find models that are going to work far better than the ones we now have, we're going to continue with the level of challenge that we have. And that's why I am saying that the Teaching Service Commission, the Concordat, the government's town hall meeting, the government also launched a committee to review the Concordat. All of that, I would say is small child's play in comparison to the big question that we have. How do we educate the children of this nation to vision Trinidad and Tobago for the next 30 years? To me, that's where I would prefer to spend the energy and the time over the next 10 years of my time as Archbishop. That's where I would like to see us in partnership going forward. And let's add to that, the US and the United Nations and others are putting pressure on CARICOM to introduce a comprehensive sex education. And you know what that means?
And listen,
And this would teach your child
yes,
that his or her biological sex is not a given, that each one could choose freely to identify as he or she likes. Now, this thing has been tried and tested in Canada, has pushed it very far to the extreme. America's pushing it also. I just saw the Prime Minister of Britain, England, saying, no, 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 no. Marsha breaks. This is not going to happen here. If a child wants to decide that its biological sex at birth is different from how they want to identify now, the parents must be informed. Because this is the other thing in these other nations. Without parental consent, a child can transition. And then, and again, not understanding that the parent, the denomination, and the government have a partnership to be held. So with the big pressure from the US, from the United Nations upon CARICOM to introduce laws on comprehensive sex education, we have now to recognize that this is a whole new level in the education that we have to start working towards. Children in Barbados underwent an extremely intrusive questionnaire about gender fluidity, masturbation, and all kinds of areas of their life that a child at that age should not. And the questionnaire was one thing. The fact that the child's name was on the questionnaire, and therefore 30 years from now, that questionnaire could be dug up and be used against that child, that to me is an offense against the dignity of a child. And it was clear that the questionnaire had to do more with international desire for introducing comprehensive sex education than any national agenda that was coming forward. And I'm saying all of that is coming home to us. So I've heard that CARICOM is working on a review of its gender policy. UWI is also working on a review of its gender policy. And the government is going to face significant pressure from international agencies on this matter. And as long as the Concordat stands, however, curriculum cannot be introduced into our schools, because that's one of the guarantees of the Concordat, that no book, text, or curriculum can be introduced into a denominational school without the consent of that denomination. So we might actually be very important for the government, who has been blocking this thing as it can locally. But when it starts to come with the international partners, it's going to create a really difficult space. Over the last 2 weeks, there have been so many rumors, but every time I have checked one of them about the different questionnaires, the books introduced, I can't find any credible evidence that any of those rumors are true. And in fact, the Ministry of Education put out something to say that, there is a lot of rumor and a lot of mischief going on. And please don't believe what you're seeing in social media. So nobody, if somebody has a book that was used inappropriately in a classroom, or introduced in a classroom, or a questionnaire that was introduced to a child that's inappropriate, please send it in. But I can't find any. And the Minister of Education has said, no, this is not so. So let's not get to the extreme of the mischief that we've been seeing. We have enough real stuff that we're going to have to deal with together. My position is really, really simple. When I see what's coming down the road, I think we better strengthen our partnership right now for the education of our children. And then your best friend, ChatGPT. Your best friend.
You're leaking me, boy. You're leaking me.
Yeah, that's your best friend. ChatGPT has made knowledge available everywhere in a matter of seconds. So education is no longer about information, you know. It's now about what was called before the hidden curriculum: values, faith, character, discerning truth from false information, analyzing, evaluating, and ultimately using the information for creating in keeping with the higher ends of Bloom's taxonomy.
Yes.
That's really where education has to go. Before we focus 80% of our education on information, 20% on what is called a hidden curriculum. Not anymore. Our children could get access to the information as good as we can give them in a whole host of ways.
Yeah.
What the children cannot get access to is what is called the hidden curriculum: the faith, the values, the character, discerning truth from false information. These are the ones that are more difficult for a child to get some access to, and especially as the family is more challenged, the school is picking up a lot more of what the
Parents used to have to fill.
Parents used to be giving before.
Yeah. So I see you worked out a plan. You worked out a plan to transform underperforming schools.
Yeah, this is back in the day, as early as that plan was first issued under Joe Harris, and I have sent it back to the government in several different ways over the last couple of years. The great challenge the nation faces is that when you have a poor community that is failing, its school also fails unless you change the model of education. And that change is relatively expensive for the denomination to do, but very cheap by comparison to what it will cost to house those same children in prison 10 years later.
My God.
So we had worked out about $7 million a year to move education forward in 12 or 15 underperforming schools. That was the setup cost, because you have to test, and then you have to introduce new modalities of learning for them. You have to change the brain pattern by using different ways of education that we have not done before. So it's a very expensive process for denomination to do. But if we had a partnership with the government, then we could do this, and then all of our underperforming schools, rural and urban, this could then be used to help in everywhere once we figure out what actually works. Well, that's the partnership I want. That's the conversation I want to have. That's the way forward I would like to see, that we start making a contribution to the real big problems. The migrant issue. We've said to the government, we are ready to educate the children, the migrant children who are living in Trinidad and Tobago. And we've done a lot of work with all kinds of agencies, including UE and UN and all kinds, and prepared principles and run courses on how you receive a foreign, a non-English speaker into your school. And we've done a lot of work on this. But we're now seeing a place where we're finding that partnership with the government to allow this to work and this to move forward. And this is really important. So I say we're at the crossroads. And at this crossroads, I would love to see a partnership. But one hand can't clap. If the government wants a partnership, then it has to decide that's what it wants. Let's get to the table and let's start doing the work that we need to do to move this nation forward. If, however, what they want is something that is not a partnership, well, okay. We will lock ourselves into a squabble and a fight, and who will suffer are the children of the nation.
The children.
That's who will suffer. We have a 19th century education system that we're running in Trinidad and Tobago right now. trying to teach 21st century children. Ultimately, it's not working. And we have to do better than this. And it can't happen by the government alone. It can't happen by the denominational boards alone. It can't happen by the parents alone. We need a partnership to move this whole thing forward.
So what's your key message?
What's my key message?
Yes.
The religious denominations have been educating the children of the nation for hundreds of years. To move the nation forward to the 21st century education, we need a partnership between the government, the denominational boards, and the parents. Action step.
Action step.
Reflect on how you deal with conflict. Do you fight first, or do you seek a resolution first? I am asking you to look and pick one area of contention in your life or one relationship and ask, what would a resolution look like and what could you do to move towards that? And scripture reading is from Philippians 4:6-7. Do not worry about anything, but present your needs to God in prayer and petition and thanksgiving. Then the peace of God, which is beyond all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus.
Education needs partnership, not conflict. Pick up your Catholic news. Take a read. I think, this conversation was deep and long. Archbishop Jay, thanks a lot for meeting with us this evening and sharing your thoughts on the Concordat, sharing your thoughts that we need a partner if we want to get our kids ready or build this nation for the 21st century. But, we need prayer. Prayer is, that's where we are.
Father God, we beg you, give us the grace to vision a way forward for educating every child and every group of children in our nation. And give us courage to build partnerships, that where there is adversity now, that what we will have is strong partnerships that will serve the children and serve our nation. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thanks, Archbishop Jay. Don't forget, we're on tonight. We twice every Thursday. We're on Sunday at 10 o'clock. We can listen to us also on 99.5 and on social media. Good night. Thanks a lot, Archbishop Jay. God bless you.
God bless you, Deacon.